The night before my college graduation, my mother called to tell me she wouldn't be coming, not because she was sick, not because of a flight delay or a family emergency. She called to tell me that my sister's spring recital, a piano recital for a 10-year-old that happened every single year, was scheduled the same weekend, and she had already promised to be there. You understand, sweetheart. You always understand. I sat on the edge of my dorm bed for a long time after I hung up. My roommate was out celebrating with her family, who had driven 14 hours from Alabama just to watch her walk across the stage. I could hear people laughing in the hallway. Someone had a bottle of champagne. I was the first person in my family to graduate from a 4-year university. First one. And my mother was choosing a piano recital. I should back up. I grew up in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows everyone and the yards are always mowed and it all looks very normal from the outside. My parents weren't bad people in the dramatic, obvious way. They weren't cruel. They didn't hit us. They fed us and clothed us and sent us to decent schools. But there were 2 daughters in that house, and I'm here to tell you that being treated differently doesn't have to look like abuse to leave marks. My sister Corinne was born 4 years after me. She came out with bright blue eyes and a personality that filled every room she walked into, and from the moment she arrived, something shifted in our household in a way nobody ever named out loud. Corinne got the new clothes. I got the hand-me-downs from cousins I barely knew. Corinne's dance lessons started at age 5. I asked for guitar lessons when I was 8 and was told we couldn't afford it. 3 months later, Corinne got a brand new keyboard. I learned to stop asking. My father was a good man in the distracted, unavailable way that some fathers are. He worked long hours managing a regional supply chain for a hardware company, came home tired, watched the news, went to bed. He loved us, I believe that. But love without attention isn't much of a shelter, and my mother's preferences filled every corner of our home unchallenged. I was a quiet kid. I read a lot. I did well in school because it was the one place where the playing field felt even, where what I put in was what I got back. No favoritism, no invisible hierarchy. My teachers liked me. I got into honors classes. I started thinking about college when I was 13. Quietly, secretly, like it was something I wasn't allowed to want out loud. When I got my acceptance letter from Ohio State, I remember showing it to my mother at the kitchen table. She looked at it for a moment, said, "That's wonderful, honey," and then called to my sister to ask if she wanted more orange juice. My father shook my hand that night. He seemed genuinely proud. But he also didn't push back when my mother suggested that since the school was only 5 minutes from home, I could save money by commuting. I chose to live in the dorms anyway, using scholarship money I had applied for entirely on my own. I think that was the first real decision I ever made purely for myself, and it terrified me and thrilled me in equal parts. College was the first time I understood what it felt like to be seen. My roommate freshman year was a girl named Toby from a small town in West Virginia, funny and direct and completely unimpressed by people who tried to make her feel small. We became close fast, the way you do when you're both far from home and figuring out who you actually are. I joined the school newspaper. I got a part-time job at the campus library. I made friends who asked my opinion and listened when I answered. I also met Professor Hargrove. He taught a seminar on investigative journalism in my sophomore year, a small class, maybe 16 students, in one of the older buildings on the east side of campus. He had the kind of teaching style that felt like a conversation. He asked questions instead of delivering lectures, and he genuinely wanted to know what you thought. At the end of that semester, he pulled me aside after class and told me I had a natural instinct for structure and sourcing that most students didn't develop until their 3rd or 4th year. He asked if I'd considered applying for the campus news editor position. I had not considered it. I applied. I got it. By junior year, I was running the student news section, managing a team of 12, and had been approached about a summer internship at a regional newspaper in Cleveland. My advisor forwarded my portfolio to an editor she knew personally. The internship became a position offer, conditional, part-time, but real. I called home with the news. My mother asked if the pay was good. I said it wasn't much, but it was a real journalism job. She said she hoped it wouldn't distract me from finishing my degree. Then she told me that Corinne had placed first in a regional piano competition and they were thinking of enrolling her in a special program in Cincinnati. "That's great," I said. "That's really great for her." That was the shape of things. Every milestone of mine was acknowledged briefly and redirected. I stopped sharing them eventually. I graduated summa cum laude with a journalism degree and a job waiting. I had built that entirely on my own. Which brings me back to the phone call, the night before graduation. After I hung up, I sat there for a while. Then I texted Toby, who had graduated the year before and was living in Pittsburgh. She called me back in under 2 minutes. She said, "What?" I repeated it. Toby was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, what do you need right now?" That's what I mean when I say college was the first time I understood what it felt like to be seen. I told her I didn't know. She said she was going to call someone and I should keep my phone on. 20 minutes later, she called back. "I talked to my uncle," she said. "He's in Columbus for a conference. He would be genuinely honored to come to your graduation tomorrow. He's that kind of person. I told him about you and he said, and I quote, 'That girl sounds like the real deal.'" His name was Howard. 63 years old, retired high school principal, the kind of man who wore a tie to a conference on a Friday because he believed in showing up properly. I had met him once before briefly at Toby's graduation party the previous spring. He had a firm handshake and remembered details. He had asked me, that one time we met, what I was working on for the paper, and then actually listened to my answer. I almost said no, not because I didn't want him there, but because there was something about asking for that, asking someone to show up for me in a way my own family wasn't, that felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. Toby said, "Stop trying to make yourself smaller to make this easier for them." So I said yes. Howard showed up the next morning in a charcoal suit with a small bouquet of white flowers, daisies and baby's breath, that he handed to me before the ceremony with the ease of a man who had done this many times and understood exactly what the moment called for. He said, "Toby talks about you like you hung the moon. I can see why." I didn't cry. I was too surprised to cry. My father was there. I should clarify that. He came alone without my mother, which I hadn't expected. He looked a little lost, standing outside the arena, holding a card in an envelope, unsure what to do with himself. We hugged, and it was one of those hugs where you can feel a person wanting to say something they don't have the words for. He shook Howard's hand when I introduced them. I watched him register the situation, watch something move across his face. Discomfort maybe, or recognition. He didn't say anything about it. The ceremony itself was everything I had imagined since I was 13 years old, lying in my childhood bed wondering if I was allowed to want things. My name was called. I crossed the stage. Dean Whitfield handed me my diploma and said, "Congratulations, we're proud of you." Standard language. Ceremonial. But I heard it differently that day. I heard it like it was true. Howard stood up when my name was called. He clapped loudly and then put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled the way people do at baseball games. A few people around him laughed. My father stood too, a second late, uncertain, but he stood. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the courtyard. My father excused himself to make a phone call. I assumed to my mother, and Howard and I stood with Toby, who had driven down from Pittsburgh at 6 in the morning and arrived looking like she'd had a full night's sleep just to spite the distance. And then, something happened that I hadn't planned for. Professor Hargrove found me in the crowd. He congratulated me, shook Howard's hand when introduced, and then said there was something he wanted me to know in person. He said the paper in Cleveland had called him directly to ask for an additional reference because they were considering upgrading my position from part-time to full-time staff. He had given the reference. He said, "And I want to remember this exactly, you're going to do the kind of work that matters." I've been teaching for 22 years and I don't say that to everyone. I looked at my father, who had come back from his phone call and was standing close enough to hear. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were wet. I didn't know what to do with that. We had lunch afterward at a restaurant near campus. Toby, Howard, my father, and me. Howard ordered the salmon and asked my father thoughtful questions about his work, the kind of questions that put people at ease, and my father answered slowly at first and then more openly. At some point, my father looked across the table at me and said, "You did something here, you really did something." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. It was a strange afternoon, not the one I had imagined, not the one I had grieved over the night before. Something else, something I didn't quite have a name for yet. My mother called during dessert. My father answered and stepped outside. When he came back, he said she sent her love and congratulations. I nodded again. Toby caught my eye and gave me a small, deliberate look that said, "I see what's happening here and you don't have to perform gratitude for it." She knows me well. Here is what I want to say about the next part, because this is where things shifted in a way I am still honestly processing. 3 weeks after graduation, I started my full-time position at the paper in Cleveland. The editor who hired me was a woman named Bev, 50-something, no nonsense, the kind of person who corrects your copy in red ink and means it as a compliment. She gave me a beat, local government and zoning, not glamorous but real. She said, if you can make zoning interesting, you can make anything interesting. I decided to take that as a challenge. I found a story in my third week. It started as a routine zoning variance request in a suburb east of the city. A developer was seeking approval to build a mixed-use complex on land that was currently classified as residential. Standard enough. Except when I pulled the public records, I noticed something odd about the timeline. The variance request had been filed 6 weeks before the property officially changed hands, which meant someone had submitted paperwork on property they didn't yet legally own, with advance knowledge that the sale would close. I spent 2 weeks pulling thread. Property records, county meeting minutes, campaign finance disclosures. I found a pattern. The same developer had done this in 3 other counties over 5 years, each time with a local official who had received a campaign contribution in the cycle before the variance was approved. Nothing illegal on its face. But the pattern was there, consistent and documented. I brought it to Bev. She read through my notes for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Can you source every single one of these connections independently?" I said yes, she said, on a Tuesday. By Friday, it had been picked up by 2 state outlets and flagged by the county ethics board for review. By the following week, one of the officials I'd written about had announced he would not seek re-election. That was my first real story. I was 23 years old. My mother called me that weekend. She had seen the story. My father had sent her the link. She said she was proud of me. She said she had always known I was capable of great things. She said she hoped I was eating well and not working too hard. I listened. I said thank you. I got off the phone. Then I sat in my Cleveland apartment, small, second floor, a window that looked out onto the parking lot of a laundromat, and I thought about what it means to be seen by the wrong people at the wrong time for so long that you almost forget it's supposed to feel different. Toby called that evening. She said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Honestly, like the ground is slightly different under my feet." She laughed. She said, "That's exactly what it's supposed to feel like." What I want people to understand, and I'm saying this for anyone who grew up in a house where love was rationed unevenly, where you learned to need less because needing more was dangerous, is that the story doesn't end with the big moment. The graduation, the award, the newspaper story, those things matter. But what changes you is something quieter. It's the Tuesday afternoon when you're sourcing a story and you realize you're not bracing for someone to tell you that you got it wrong. It's the Friday morning when your editor reads your work and says this is good, and you believe her without immediately looking for the catch. It's learning to let the ground feel different. My relationship with my parents has changed since then, slowly, imperfectly. My father calls more than he used to. We talk about my work, about small things. He told me last spring that he regrets not pushing back more when I was young, not those exact words, because he's not a man who finds those words easily, but I understood what he meant. I told him I wasn't looking backward. That was true when I said it. It gets more true every year. My mother and I are cordial. I love her. I think she loves me. I don't think she fully understands what she communicated to me throughout my childhood about my place in the family, and I've made my peace with the fact that she may never understand it. Some people don't have the capacity to see what they can't see. Expecting them to is a way of staying small yourself. Corinne is 16 now. She's genuinely talented at piano, not that that was ever the point. We're not close, but we're not distant either. She texts me sometimes, funny things, observations. There's a version of the future where we figure each other out. I'm keeping that door open. Howard came to my 1-year work anniversary lunch. Toby organized it, rented out a back room at a Thai place near my apartment, invited a handful of my work friends and Professor Hargrove via video call from a conference in Denver. Howard gave a short toast. He said, "The measure of a person isn't what they were handed, it's what they built from what they weren't." He looked at me when he said it. I finally cried, not from grief, from something I think I can now call gratitude, not the performed kind, not the kind you offer because it's expected, but the real kind, the kind that sits in your chest like something solid and warm. There's a quote I've carried with me since I first read it on a poster in the hallway of my high school, probably purchased from some inspirational catalog and hung without much thought by a well-meaning administrator. I rolled my eyes at it at 14. At 24, I found it copied into a notebook from that year in my own handwriting, which means part of me heard it even when I was pretending not to. It said, "The people who show up are your family." I used to think that was a consolation prize, something people said to make you feel better about what you were missing. I don't think that anymore. I think it's a fact. Dry, simple, empirical. The people who show up are your family, and I have been lucky enough, after a long time of thinking I wasn't lucky at all, to find mine. I'm still at the paper in Cleveland. I have my own byline. Bev promoted me last fall to lead the investigative unit. A team of 4 now, small but serious. I'm 27. I am exactly where I wanted to be when I was 13 years old lying in my childhood bed. And if my mother calls this week to tell me about Corinne's latest recital, I will listen, and I will mean it when I say I'm glad. Because I'm not carrying that weight anymore. Because I set it down somewhere between graduation day and that first Tuesday my story ran, and I have not gone back for it. Some doors close behind you so quietly that you don't realize they've shut until you're already standing in sun on the other side. That's what healing feels like, I think. Not a door slamming. Just the slow, quiet certainty that the room you used to live in is no longer where you belong.